trying to nurture you and like give you a sense of your own agency and personhood in the world, which I think is like very precious. But then at some point you realize you're a child, you're a literal child. You have like no true power against the adults of the world. And I think that's like the first big tragedy. And the second big tragedy is looking at your parents and realizing they're just people.
Welcome to the Bad Mothers Podcast. I'm Monica Cardenas. I'm a huge book nerd, so I'm always looking for ways to incorporate books into my work here on the podcast and on the Bad Mothers Substack. Speaking of, on Tuesday, April 28th, you can join the book club chat for Catherine Angel's Daddy Issues live on Substack. I think books, including and maybe especially novels, have the power to teach us so much about ourselves and the world around us. They help us begin to understand what it's like to be in another person's shoes, and nothing else really does that so effectively. I think this can be true when we're experiencing estrangement too. I was entranced by The Original Daughter by Jemimah Wei. It's set in Singapore in the very recent past and centers on a small family, in particular two sisters who become estranged. I'm delighted that I got to speak to Jemimah about her beautiful novel, which is now out in paperback, so if you haven't read it yet, go get it. We avoid spoilers here as best we can. But first, let me tell you a bit about Jemimah. She was born and raised in Singapore and splits her time between Singapore and the US. She's a National Book Foundation 5 Under 35 honoree, winner of the William Van Dyke Short Story Prize, and formerly held the Wallace Stegner Fellowship and the Felipe Alba Fellowship at Stanford University and Columbia University, respectively. The Original Daughter debuted at number 1 on the Straits Times bestseller list, is a Good Morning America book club pick, and a New York Times editor's choice. The Original Daughter won the Country Award for the Chommanard International Women's Literary Award, was longlisted for the Dublin Literary Award, and named a Best Book of Spring by Time, Foreign Policy, Harper's Bazaar, Elle, Vogue, and more. So obviously, if you haven't read it yet, go get it. It's now out on paperback. Now let's hear from Jemimah about the estrangement themes in The Original Daughter. All right. Thank you, Jemimah, for being here on the Bad Mothers podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
So we're here to talk about your novel, The Original Daughter. And I thought, just to start off, maybe if you could summarize the novel for us, because I'm interested to hear how you would describe it versus, the book blurb.
Okay, so this novel, The Original Daughter, is about two sisters. One is adopted after a family scandal, and they grow up in the rapidly modernizing Singapore. And in my mind, they are really two sides of the same coin, or two people who are squeezed into a pot that's almost too small for the both of them. And so they're trying to grow together. They love each other very much. They're very codependent. They're very intimate. But they're also extremely competitive. They have extremely, on the surface similar but internally divergent goals or ambitions for themselves. But they want desperately to stay linked together. Obviously, that becomes its own problem. And as they grow and go through the ultra competitive, ultra stressful, like pressure cooker system of Singapore, they become violently estranged. And the book is kind of about why and how they got there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because it opens sort of in present time when they are estranged. And then we get a look back to when Aaron first came to live with Genevieve's family and how close they became and like you said, how we got there, how we got to the estrangement. I thought the title is really clever because for me, I think it points directly to the conflict in their relationship, which is that Genevieve will always be the quote unquote original. But it's hard to say if that's actually the better position to be in. But
Yeah,
that's
thanks.
something you
Thanks
thought
for
about?
saying that. Well, the title was hard, man. Like this book took 9 years to write, and I want to say all the way up to year 7, I could not find the right title for it.
Mm,
It was like untitled novel. Then I was like trying out different titles. I tried for a long time, my placeholder title was Fault Lines, which I think also um kind of like you can kind of see why it was fault lines, with the, it was like because of the earthquake that also plays a part in the novel, and the fault lines of family and all of that. But then Emily Itami, the wonderful writer, then published a novel called Fault Lines in I think 2021 or 2022. And I was like, oh no, I have to like find a new title now. And so we got to the point where I was sending the novel out, parts of the novel out for applications, and I really, really, really needed a title. And that's when I sat down and I went through the book and I was like, please just like give me a title book. And then I went through it, and there's a line in the book where Genevieve says like, I will always be her firstborn and original daughter, and and the line is like placed in the context of like how that has kind of like chained them to a specific dynamic and created like a lot of resentment and disappointment, um, and even though it was something she once held as like some like something, a point of pride. And so when I found it, I was like, I think that's the title. I think that's the original daughter as a title. And I put it as a title. Again, it was actually a little bit of a placeholder. I was like, maybe a better title will show up. But we queried my agent, sold the book, came closer and closer to the publication date, and we still didn't change the title. And I was like, I think it's stuck because it's like like it just felt like so right for it as time went on. The real debate I had with my team, not really a debate, like we were all trying to discuss it together. Like we were trying to decide, did we want to do it as the original daughter or like original daughter? And actually, I don't think it matters because many people actually refer to it offhand as original daughter. But I wanted it in the title to be the original daughter because it kind of like subtly places this sense of hierarchy, like a sense of Genevieve being like, I am the original daughter, not just
Yeah.
a original daughter. So even in that, I wanted there to be like that dynamic of like of them paying attention to what who is like coming up on top, who is like kind of like the prime uh like sister. And that ends up being like one of their biggest conflicts over the course of the book. Yeah.
Yeah. I loved the relationship that we see between Genevieve and her mother before
Mm-hmm.
Aaron comes to
Mm-hmm.
live with them, in particular when they sneak off to McDonald's. And Genevieve is just so enamored with her mother, and it's such a lovely relationship to witness. And I can see how Sue, her mother, is trying very hard to help Genevieve through this transition. Um, and also Aaron, as the new child who's sort of, cast out of her family unceremoniously and dropped into this new one. So I think Sue gets kind of a bad rep because she's described as overbearing as the girl's age, but I can see how she really decenters herself and focuses so much on these girls. Can you maybe talk a little bit about the family dynamic that you set up in the novel and, your intentions with, the people you chose to include in the family?
Sure. So I am really enamored with the concept of failing upwards. So I mean, even in the literature that I read or like the narratives that I gravitate towards, I during this period of time, which is like 9 years, which is like significant, I always found that I reacted the most strongly to characters who were really like trying their best and failing, but upwards, kind of like every time they try, they fail a little better, fail a little deeper, or in a like a different, more nuanced way. So I think that is what kind of characterizes all the dynamics of the different pairings you see, like the tripod of the sisters and the mother, the sisters themselves, like the mother and the father, like what they want to be for each other, even like the grandmother, they're all trying their best, but they're trying in ways that fail each other. I think to me that is more interesting than um like the dynamic where someone's like, I'm chasing after you, and the other person's like, I'm not interested. Or I'm trying to be convinced to be interested to like fight
Mm,
for this relationship. For me, everyone there is fighting for their lives. Like they are trying so hard to, like kind of define themselves independently in a relationship where it's difficult to do that, and have that not like fracture the relationship. Because one of the like leading or like the kind of like true line questions I had throughout writing this book was, the question of what love can endure. Like I knew I wanted to write a love story. I knew I didn't want it to be romantic because I was tired of like, growing up with like romance being the big thing that like, was in
Mm,
all the stories around me. It's like it was almost as if you graduated from friendship to romance, which I don't believe in. I believe those things sit on the same shelf. And so um, I knew that my first book would be about a non-romantic relationship, but I wanted it to have the intensity of like to kind of show that those things are equal, like or can
mm,
be more more intense even. Because as a young woman growing up in the world, I just don't think that like romance is like even plays like any significant part. At like 8 years old, like 10 years old, 12 years old, your most intimate connections, the people you become the most attached to or like feel the most strongly for are like peers or like mentors or like parents or like teachers, like things like that. Just
mm,
other for me it was like other women, like other non-romantic relationships. And so because of that, I felt like it was important for me to show that in these relationships. And Jen, to me, I was thinking very much of like when I was reading as a child, I felt any book I picked up that was like well done made me feel like I was entering like kind of like an imaginative kingdom. And I wanted to replicate that in the relationship between Jen and her mother, pre-Erin, right? So she just thinks that the world of her mother. And I think that's so common to the way young children
mm,
in feel, like childhood really is like a kingdom of the imagination. And I think one of the first big tragedies of childhood is realizing, number one, that you have no agency when you are made to feel that you do. I mean, in like, parenting, like many parents, I mean, there are many styles, right? There's like, but there's a style that gears towards, I'm going to tell you what to do because I'm the mom. And then there's the other style, which is like trying to nurture you and like give you a sense of your own agency and personhood in the world, which I think is like very precious. But then at some point you realize you're a child, you're a literal child. You have like no true power against the adults of the world. And I think that's like the first
mm,
big tragedy. And the second big tragedy is looking at your parents and realizing they're just people.
mm,
And I think how people adapt or survive to that like realization, whether or not they perceive it as like a betrayal or like they start to like feel embarrassed for their parents, or they are able to like grow past that and become companionable like friends with their
mm,
parents. I think it's like quite fascinating to me. So within the sisters, one is more able to do that than the other. And that was something that was like quite fascinating for me to follow. And actually, when I decided to include, when you asked about the question about how I decided to include these people in the family, initially it was going to be Jen and her parents, and then a friend, like a childhood friend, Erin. But I wanted them to be as close as possible. And then at the same time, I was trying to write this other novel. When you're when you have like many pots cooking, I was trying to write this
mm,
other novel about like family members who were swapped around, because this was actually very common in my parents' generation, where kids were kind of like given away or like taken in and you're not blood related to them. And I felt very much like much of my memories of childhood would be like meeting somebody and then later hearing, oh, they're not really sisters, or that's not really your aunt. That's like someone took in, or like, oh, your aunt
right.
was like given away some. So I kind of like I had that separately going, and then I had this story going, and then I kind of like combined the two to be
Mm,
like, it was like kind of like a different branch of the question, like what can love like endure and survive. It's like, can chosen family keep choosing each other um if like you grow to a point where you don't need to be together, you're not obliged to be together anymore. So that was
right.
like very interesting to me when I included them in this like family
Yeah.
dynamic.
Yeah. And I think in estrangement circles, that question, can you grow together or do you still want to have a
Yeah,
relationship? That applies to people in non-chosen families, in birth families as well, I think. I think that's the way a
totally.
lot of people who are estranged would think about that, in that I think your book is unique in terms of the estrangement question because there's no like ongoing pain or abuse or mistreatment. It's
Mm,
just like really severe falling outs that remain unresolved for periods of time, except for Sue and her mother. I think that would be the
yeah.
only exception. But
Wait, I have a question.
yes,
Are you like, is this like a spoiler-free podcast? Like,
I'm trying
what's
to
your,
refrain
yeah.
from big spoilers.
Okay. Okay, great.
Yeah, so I won't give away the big spoilers. We'll try to avoid that, but
Okay.
generally, you know, the the thrust of the story. But I liked how you framed it as a romance because I think one of the things I've been thinking about and the reason I wanted this focus this season on sibling estrangement is because while I'm estranged from my mother, I'm very close, like codependently close with my sisters. I have five younger sisters.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
so I'm really fascinated by those sister relationships, reading about them and just generally. So I loved the dynamic between Genevieve and Aaron. And in some ways, I think that because Genevieve wanted so much to be a good sister, and she considered it more than I think most other siblings do, because it was sort of thrust on her
Mhm.
unexpectedly, and when Aaron wasn't also an infant, right? Normally when we get a sister,
Yeah.
it's an infant and you can't really do a lot with a baby. But she had sort of a built-in best friend with Aaron. So I thought that was also an interesting dynamic and it made the relationship different to other birth siblings, I guess.
Right. I mean, I do think that there is the person you are, there's the person you think you are, and there's the person you want to be. And so with Genevieve, it's like she wants to be a version of herself, but she's not actually able to bridge that gap. And I think similarly with Aaron, because one of the things I was thinking about as I was developing their relationship is their relationship to their self-image as well, or like self-regard. So Aaron is somebody who wants that love so badly, she will self-abandon in the face of it. So
Mm,
if you like track a progress of the book, like I mean, I was just thinking about the question of like estrangement, like choosing to walk away from a relationship or like to take a break from a relationship um, is often framed as failure. And in some cases it is, but for some people it's a matter of survival. There is another character in the book, not the siblings, like the dad,
hmm
but who, and like, you know, the generations of men in the book who, you know, like really believed at some point that it was like very crucial to their survival to like walk away from something.
hmm
Um, and people have like their own takes on it, like, you know, because it impacts people differently. And so with Erin and with Jen, I also thought about, you know, like what would bring them to a point where there is no big thing, there's no one great like violent crime that that like triggers an estrangement, but just like a gradual fracturing.
hmm
What how can we, like in the way we live with each other, you know, like overcome or encompass or like recognize the frictions of living together in very, very close, intimate, like psychological quarters, right? So
hmm
not just the fact that they live in the same room, share the same bed, but also like the fact that their like lives and their thoughts and their like their way of conceptualizing like a dream for themselves is so tied up with each other. Um, but we cannot like melt together as people. Like that's not possible to like mind melt. And so necessarily because we are different people, that will lead to like conflicts. There will be like frictions, and they are very invested in not acknowledging those frictions because they think that like they want to like stay together. So then if you don't like acknowledge those frictions and like deal with them, they lead to like tiny blow ups over time. And I think
hmm
that like sense of like the small explosions um is something that's really interesting to me, which actually reminds me that an earlier placeholder name for this novel was Smaller Crimes, which is like a terrible
hmm
name. But I think the very, very early draft, I was like, maybe Smaller Crimes. And then I was like, no, maybe Fault Lines. And then I went
hmm
through many versions. I was like, maybe The Original Daughter. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, because you can see those little, like you said, little fractures. And it's interesting. I'm curious now that I think about it in those terms. Is it maybe because they weren't birth sisters? I don't know if the dynamic was a bit different because my sisters and I always joke that when we do something that makes one of us angry, or hurts our feelings or whatever, we say it in the moment to them, like, how could you do that? Or probably not anything
Yeah.
as civil as that. We'll just spout off whatever comes into our head, but it's resolved at that time. We don't let things sort of
Right.
simmer away. And I don't know if that's just a dynamic in my family or because we've known each other literally our entire lives, so we're just comfortable doing that. But it seems that something Aaron and Jen didn't have. At least Genevieve didn't seem like she felt she could say how Aaron was making her feel until they have their big blow up.
Yeah. I think for me that question is like more a question around what is their relationship to secrecy and secrets? Because um for the two of them, it's more like, so okay, I don't think this is a spoiler since this is literally the start of the book, right? So basically, for context, what happens is at 8 years old, Jen, who has believed that she's like the only daughter her entire life. And, they live in spare economic circumstances. Life is not easy. It's her parents, and her grandmother, who's like a bit of a terrorizer. She's like really like this formidable force, very scary, live in the same house. And it's a one bedroom. It's really small and they're like cramped. But she's like, but it's okay because like, I love my family. Like she just feels like her parents are like the best, like fairy
Mm-hmm.
tale people ever. And then suddenly it's the grandmother is like, well, your grandfather, who we thought was dead in the war, was actually not dead and had this other family. And anyway, they have too many kids and they're giving us the youngest and we have to take care of the. So it's like this sudden instant sister that's dropped into her life. And I had plotted way back, in the parents' generation, the grandparents' generation. It just didn't like make it into the book. But in my mind, the father character I worked really, really hard on, Wei Ming, he grew up his whole life believing that he had to protect his mother from the truth because I think I mean again this is early in the book, but like she believed that her husband had gone away to like fight in the war and that he would have come back
Mm-hmm.
if he had stayed alive. Like it was the only narrative she could hold on to in order not to like have total like ego collapse, like to be
Mm-hmm.
like, oh, that's why he's not back because he died in the war. But obviously, like it's to I think external parties and especially to the father, as when he turns like 14 or 15, it becomes clear that that's like not really true. Like it's not. It is possible that there were other things that happened, and she's so like tightly held to this narrative of like she's been abandoned, she's been like by death, that he wants to really protect her from like the laughter of the neighborhood people, because they live in like a small neighborhood and everybody knows everybody. And then for that secret to suddenly be turned over, for her to suddenly now in her like old age be like, nope, like I'm making a decision. I'm taking, like he was alive. It's we have just learned this, and I am gonna like take in somebody. I've already been corresponding with them. To the father is a big betrayal. He's like, how
Mm-hmm.
we collaborated kind of on this reality. How can you make this decision without telling us? But at the same time, all the adults are aware that there is a child here that has been abandoned, needs, like they want to be careful with her. They don't want
Mm-hmm.
to like re-traumatize the child for like no reason. And so I think because of that, they all are trying to pretend that, everything's fine. They're all like, even the narrative before Erin comes in is she is going to be your sister. We have to do everything we can to make her feel like welcome. And it is like well intentioned, right? But
Mm-hmm.
because of that, nobody ever acknowledges the fact that she is not above sister. Like as the story goes on, everyone's like, it's the same, but it's not really the same, like because they tiptoe
Mm-hmm.
around her a little bit, because they're
Yeah.
not able to
Yeah.
acknowledge like the big secret of her birth, which is not even really a secret. It's just a secret because they're not telling anybody. And so
Yeah.
because of that, like it creates a sense of like there is like a part of our relationship we cannot go to. There's a part of our relationship we cannot like encroach, and so there is like like a civility or respect even
Mm-hmm.
with the parents and Arian, or between Genevieve and Arian, that creates distance, right? Because in true very 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 like intimate relationships there's almost nothing you can talk about, like
Yeah.
and so that made me think about like the relationship they have to like withholding and secrets out of love. It is out of love, but it does create a distance.
As Jen ages, she gets more and more frustrated with her mother, which I think
Mm-hmm.
is, predictable as daughters grow up. Usually there is some stress in that relationship. Um, but it's their relationship is strained by lots of other factors too. Their poverty. You just mentioned her father's absence. and Erin. And then, of course, Genevieve is sort of struggling with her value, I guess, as she like struggles through school and work and those sorts of things. So I mentioned before that other reviewers have described Sue as overbearing, which I can think of a few examples where you might say that, but I didn't think of her that way in a general sense. So, can you maybe talk more about how you decided to show the cracks in Jen and Sue's, her mother's relationship? Um, because they do eventually have a period of estrangement, which we know doesn't continue because at the beginning of the book, at the frame, we know that they're together, but there is a period where
Yeah.
they aren't in contact.
Yeah. I also don't think of her as overbearing. And okay, so and the thing is I actually make a habit of not reading reviews, so this is a surprise to me. um but yeah, I can actually see why. I really love Sue. I think for me she's like a character who's like maybe my most tragic character because she is like a classic case of someone who would have done very well if she were born into a different kind of circumstance. And she chose, like to leave her family of origin, to be with, like to be with her husband, and that has like kind of changed the course of her life completely. But the other life that she could have had is so close to her. It's like so present, and then the
Hmm.
choice that you make as a young person, like it never goes away, like she's never able to start over, even though she tries very desperately. She's always trying to like get back on track. She's always trying to like, it's kind of like I think of her as somebody who has so much brilliance and no output, no valve to like let that out. And so it gets totally invested in her daughters. And then her daughters become like the biggest project of her life, like,
Mm,
and I think that can be a bit challenging if you don't want to be a project, you just want to be like a kid, right? Or you just want to be a
mm,
teenager. And I really think of her as someone who's like trying her best. I mean, I think of all of them as people who are trying their best and are failed by their own like humanness almost. And so I just feel like she um like how close can I bring her to her daughters without having that relationship crack for as long as possible. That was something I was thinking of. But as like Genevieve grows up specifically, it's kind of like she kind of like falls out of love with that vision of her mother she has as a child, like as like a really like somebody who has a solution to literally anything. I think at
mm,
the end of that first section of childhood is when she first realizes that this is like she's just a person. And that is like unfair of Genevieve, but because everyone, like obviously her parents are just people, but that like kind of small betrayal of realizing that my mom is like just another person. She really takes it out on her mother, I think. Like she is
hmm.
not able to like, kind of like come around to the idea. She sees it real. She really, really perceives it as a betrayal, even if she knows it's unreasonable. Whereas on the other hand, Erin, like, um, really wants to be. She really follows in Jen's footsteps for everything. She's like, she thinks the world of her sister, and therefore she also like wants to have that same close relationship with Sue. She really wants to like like come closer and closer, and like also like she does love her as well. But their cracks are a little bit more, it's back to what I said earlier, which is like they don't have like that transparency in their relationship in the same way that Jen does with Sue. Jen is able to like kind of like she's a little more careless about hurting her mother. Whereas Erin
Hmm.
is always gonna be like, uh, like protective of their love. It does, yeah,
Hmm. And maybe almost like she feels a debt of gratitude to
a
Sue, do you
little bit,
think?
yeah,
Yeah.
I think so, yeah. But that's not like healthy in
Hmm.
like a relationship. You shouldn't be with people because you feel you owe them something. You should be with them because you want to be with them.
Hmm.
So yeah, I mean it definitely starts out that way, and I don't know that she ever really like is able to graduate out of that feeling. But
Hmm.
that's not to take away from her very real love for her mother. Like
Yeah.
that's something she has to work through herself. I mean, honestly, everybody in the book needs therapy. It's not like a common practice in Singapore, but yeah, I was like, yeah, everybody there needs to go for therapy, work out their relationship to themselves and their
Yeah.
self-worth, Yeah.
I would love I would love to know. You said you wrote more about Genevieve's father's story and her mother's story, even like those previous generations, it would be fascinating to read because we know, there are clues there that there are like compounding conflicts in the family that, do carry down to the girls because I guess, as you said, there's this topic they can't encroach on. So, yeah, they do need therapy for sure, but it is interesting to see how, these generational things can carry on and continue to cause problems even when you're removed from the original conflict.
Yeah, I feel like in Asia, or let me just say in Singapore, there is a huge practice of silence around things that you feel are shameful, right? I feel like maybe that is shifting with this generation where people are more open to talking about things, but there is still like this big culture of like we're looking forward, we're not going to talk about things that um like are potentially shameful in our past. We're just gonna pretend it didn't happen. And I think those like gaps of silences are like self-protective, in many
Mm,
ways because um these characters, they're just trying to survive. Like, none of them have like great lives. They're really just trying to get to like the next day, the next month, the next year. And so it almost feels like they cannot afford to like look back at the things that have hurt them. But um in fiction, that is very juicy to like go in and like kind of like almost
mm,
expose those like what really the inner workings of a silence is. And so in like all the different generations, like there are those like moments of things that they don't want to talk about, or things that they are not able to like really look back and confront, and they do kind of rear their head up and explode in the present generation, because
mm,
you can't just, if you ignore something, it doesn't just go away, it just kind of compounds and like stays under the skin.
mm.
Yeah.
Hmm. I mentioned there's lots of periods of estrangement between different family members. So Sue's estranged from both her parents. Genevieve's father leaves the family and they're not in contact for many years. Jen and her mother have very little contact for a period of time. And then finally, Aaron becomes estranged from both Jen and Sue. Do you think that there's a common root to all those estrangements? Is it what we were just talking about, that sort of, compounding generational conflict, or did you see any other like similarities between all of those?
Well, I think that we model our relationships after what we see. And so all of these characters have like grown up in different generations with that model of like people leaving, people coming back. So that narrative becomes almost like a boogeyman in their lives. Like if you think about,
Mm,
if we're talking about Jen's father, he wants desperately not to be like his dad. But because he's so conscious of it, it's like you do end up doing the same thing. You do end up
mm,
repeating those patterns. And whereas if they had grown up, like I think in a family where maybe they didn't have that model, it might be different. But I don't know because I
yeah.
didn't write that version of the story. But I do
Yeah.
think that yeah, they see it, and therefore it always looms in their head. Like it always
Mm,
is like people do leave. Like people don't have to stay, and I think then it becomes like when is leaving um like okay versus not okay. Like all of the characters, they leave because they feel like they cannot survive if they stay, right? Um, so Genevieve, in the middle of the book, like she goes to Christchurch for work. I mean, she's looking for a job. But also she feels like she cannot survive. Like the society that is extremely competitive is like slowly strangling her. And she
mm,
she genuinely feels like every day is like she cannot make it through the day. She is like not able to like live in the society the way she has fallen off the bandwagon, and she's trying so desperately to come back up and she cannot come back up. And she has seen an example of someone who doesn't come back up, which is her mother. And she's like, I don't want to become like her. I just can't be like someone who burns bright and then like burns out fast, like.
mm,
And so because of that, she's like, I need to like leave the country. So and then that like triggers like a period of like separation, right, from her family, because she's literally in a different country. um it's like if you look at every instance of like quote unquote estrangement, they are triggered not by like whimsy, but by um like a real need to survive yourself. Yeah.
mm. Yeah, that's such an important point, I think, that gets lost in discussion of estrangement is a lot of times people who initiate an estrangement are framed as doing it on a whim, but it really is a choice for survival. I think, as I said before, in your book, they do feel a little bit different, the choices they make, just because I guess at least in Genevieve's case, I felt like well, I guess because we know from the beginning of the book, she is in contact with her mother. I did always have a sense that it was just a temporary thing. Like she just needed space. As you said, she was suffocating, in Singapore. So I kind of knew that wasn't a permanent estrangement with her mother. And then the question lingers between the sisters. I think people who are estranged from family, they often have a hard time explaining why they're estranged. I mean, it's a very private question anyway, but if you choose to answer it, I think a lot of people that I've interviewed for this podcast and even in my own experience, you sort of get bogged down either into giving way too many details or you try to give an example that always feels completely inadequate and sort of silly on its
Yeah.
own.
That's
Um,
kind of exactly what I want to. Oh, sorry, I interrupted you.
oh, go on, go on.
Oh, I was gonna say that's exactly what I wanted to kind of like encapsulate in very, very early drafts. Like this sense that the crimes that we commit against each other are things that nobody else can validate except each other. So like if you
Mm,
think about the little things between them that really hurts, all of them are things that if you take out of context, sound like no big deal. Um, every instance in the book where I wanted there to be some kind of like crime committed against like a person, and that doesn't necessarily have to be within a relationship. It's just like this sense of like this thing has really affected me, and then you hold it out to the outside world and everyone's like that's not that big a deal. So I think that sense of like the magnitude of how you feel internally versus how the world feels
hmm
was something I really, really wanted to like capture. And that's exactly what you're saying, where people when they are trying to explain, they over explain and they give examples and people are like, okay, it sounds like that sounds fine, but it's not
hmm
fine because I think like how you feel inside about specific things, they have their own like weight and they have their own reality. I've had many people write to me actually about this book. Like it was interesting. This woman in the Netherlands, because it came out in Dutch, wrote to me and said that reading the book helped her like realize that something that happened to her 6 months before, like it's not okay, even though she's been telling herself that it's okay. It's just like all these little
mm
things that we don't have the language or like the framework to articulate.
mm
I think sometimes when you read a book that kind of like perfectly articulates that emotional reality for you, even if you're not like from Singapore, you're not like you don't have a sister, like you're like, in a different,
mm
completely different context. Sometimes just having that emotional framework um, can create a kind of resonance for you. And
Yeah.
that has kind of been my experience with readers. Like it's quite interesting. I've had a lot of people reach out to me to say like they reconnected with people after reading my book. And then I've also had a lot of people reach out to me to say that they realized that certain relationships were not working for them, after they read the
mm
book. And I was like, okay, that's like really like anthropologically interesting for me just to see like the
mm
spread of how people react to the book and how it like kind of impacts the way they kind of like move on with their lives. And people
mm
always ask me, oh, what do you want people to take away from your book? And I just don't feel like it's my place to say what you should like take away. But I feel like the answer I've come to is like I really hope the book just meets you where you need to be met, because it does feel like that is like the common thing for most people who have read it, which is they just like have a different version of the book they're reading almost, and it kind of
mm.
it's a different takeaway for everybody.
The flip side of that is, yes, there's these little fractures between Aaron and Genevieve, and I don't want to give it away. I won't. But the final break for them is truly shocking. And I mean, my jaw was hanging open when I read it. And I couldn't believe it. Couldn't believe the betrayal. Um, and so in
It is
that,
a betrayal, right?
yes,
Yeah,
yes.
because yeah, okay. I
But
was in
I,
conversation with somebody and they were like, it's not that big a deal. And I was like, well, okay, not to you,
no.
maybe. It's
Oh,
a
it
big
was
deal.
terrible. Yes. And for a long time, I didn't blame Genevieve, but I think it is something between sisters that is possible to forgive. I feel like I would be able to forgive it so long as the relationship, wasn't continually hurtful in that way. If, you could trust her
Yeah, yeah,
to
yeah.
not do something like that again. That was really interesting to me is they are small breaks, but I do feel like if Genevieve was explaining to a friend or something why she no longer talks to her sister and said why, I would be like, yeah, 100%. I'm on your side.
Yeah, I did think while I was writing it, I was like, is she relieved, to have something to point to? Because this book took so long, there's so many different drafts. I think what happens is with every draft, I have a different conviction, and those things all end up layering into the final draft. So the final product that you see, I think, can go like literally so many ways because at different points of writing this, I believe different things about how I would perceive it in this like kind of like layer, almost like an oyster shell layer, right? So
Mm,
it kind of feels a little bit like that for me. At some point,
yeah.
I did think to myself that while having this happen, it is something you can point to. It is like um kind of like almost like an out from a relationship. Um yeah.
Mm,
And I don't think the circumstances of why they stayed apart are also like unique, right? So like I feel like if I were I mean, I have two younger sisters and we're very close. And I was just thinking, if something like that happened, I also believe that I could probably maintain the relationship and keep going. Like we would just talk about it and probably like be pissed about it for a couple of years, but not actually like have a like significant break. And I feel like that's also because like we have similar life context, like continuing life context. Whereas for Erin, her life has drastically changed after she
mm,
was one person, and then after that she becomes another person completely. And then so your life circumstances can vary you into different
mm,
spaces where you really never have to confront an issue. You can keep running from the break. Whereas
mm,
for me, like I'm not going anywhere, like I go home and then my sisters are there, we just stare at each other and then okay, guess we have to talk about it.
mm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I wanted to talk a little bit about the difference between Jen's estrangement from her father and her mother, because they are really distinct. I mean,
Oh
like
yeah.
we talked about, she's sort of just not in contact with her mother for a few months, is it? Something like that. Um, but her father leaves the family very deliberately, and Genevieve's obviously really hurt by that. And I think it's an interesting distinction we make between the responsibilities of mothers and fathers, and how when a father leaves, it's not as big a deal as a mother leaving. At least, we don't look at it that way. And I guess I got a sense of both with your book. Like the father leaving was almost like, okay, well, the mother's there to look after them. But also we did get a strong sense of how painful that was for the
Mm,
girls for their father to leave. Is that
mhm.
something you were thinking about when you were writing about the father?
Yeah. So two things. One, I remember reading this quote like ages ago, and I'm probably gonna butcher the paraphrase, so like pardon me, but it's something along the lines of a mistake that every daughter makes is allying herself with her father and despising her mother. It's a mistake every daughter makes, and it will repeat and repeat and repeat, and she will recognize it when she is a mother herself. And I remember when I
Mm.
read that quote, I was like, damn, that's tough, man. And I like that's really painful. So I was thinking about that, like because the relationship she has with her father is a little different from the relationship she has with her mother. Um, and so her process of like growing disappointed in him is also a little different. The other thing that I was going to bring up is that I was on this panel in, I want to say Mississippi last year, and the moderator asked me, why are all the men in your book so raggedy? And I was like, what is raggedy? And she had to explain it to me. And I was like, oh, I guess that's true. Well, because I do feel, like when because I still hold to like I feel like everyone in the book is trying their best. I love the father character deeply. It was very painful to write him and create him. And I really, really felt that he was trying his best and he just couldn't. But I think the limits of who can persist when you just can't anymore is kind of gendered, right? Like, so
Mm,
the standards, I mean, everybody has similar everybody has not similar, everybody has struggles, everybody reaches their breaking point. Some people can afford to break and some people cannot. And I do find that within like a family or within like a society, the people who can afford to like kind of collapse in a certain way, it's like those do run across gender lines for me. Like,
mm, mm,
um, but the mother, she literally cannot afford to like walk out because she has a lot of responsibilities like of being a mother. She has more to think about than just herself. But I didn't want this book to then default to the like the shorthand of, oh, the irresponsible father, oh, like that person who like does this thing. This is like a there is a kind of like narrative shorthand you can kind of rely on to be like, oh, everybody understands this family dynamic, so we're just gonna like borrow it for
mm,
this book. I didn't want to flatten it that way. I wanted us to really understand why he would do that. I wanted him to not become just like a pattern in like a narrative dynamic, but I wanted him to be like a person that a reader reads and like they really maybe like they have strong feelings. Like people are like, man, I hate the dad. I'm like, okay. But like, they might have really, really strong feelings for him, but it's more important to me that everyone understands why he does what he did, right? So
yeah.
I think that is kind of like the thing that I hold true for everything in the book. Like I don't agree with many things that happen in the book. Like personally, like maybe would choose something different, but it's more important to me that that readers understand why the characters are doing what they're doing. Um, so it's kind of like what we were saying earlier, where maybe you and I could get over like a big betrayal like that, but it's important for the reader to understand why Genevieve could not, even if
Hmm.
they would make a different decision. Yeah, and
Yeah.
I feel that way about the dad. Mm.
Yeah. I mean, that's such an important thing to do in any novel, right? Is to understand why your characters or why the characters do what they do. And I think you do that brilliantly in this novel. I mean, we were with the girls for so many years of their lives, but must be like 15 years or something like that, right?
Yeah, my math is bad. I think so. Because I think we opened in 2015 and then we go back to 1996. So how many years is
Hmm.
that? Like 20 years, 19
Yeah.
years?
Okay. Yeah,
Yeah.
about 20. So,
Hmm.
um, yeah, so we're with them for so long. We see them grow up together. We see how their relationship evolves. So it does make everything that happens make sense. You know, we can understand both sides. The same goes for the parents. I think I could understand why everyone was making the choices they were, even if, it didn't seem like something I would have done. But I mean, that's the other interesting thing is that it's taking place in Singapore. They're in a lower socioeconomic class. The competition in school for the girls is like something I have never experienced. So there's all these other cultural differences that you have to contend with as well as a reader. But I found it really interesting.
That's something I really found interesting as well. I've been touring this book for close to a year and doing a lot of like conversations, podcasts, and I'm always surprised when people are like, man, the stress in school just seems like really um like it seems kind of crazy. And that's always a shock to me because I guess it's kind of like when you're a frog in water, you don't realize it. Like I just
Mm,
thought it was normal to work so hard. Like
yeah.
to basically work until you wanted to die. So I was like, yeah, every day growing up in Singapore. And it's so funny because when I tour in Singapore, when I do events, when I say like, yeah, you in school, you kind of like wake up, cry for 5 minutes, go to school, stay in school, finish school, do homework. You have like another 5 minutes to like take a shit and like cry about whatever you are stressed out about. Then you go back to work, like study, 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 do homework, do extracurricular activities, sleep, wake up, do it all over again. And everybody in Singapore was like, that's right. And everybody that I like in every audience I've like spoken to outside of Singapore was like, what is happening? Like
Yeah.
I was like, to me it just doesn't sound that crazy. I'm like, yeah, like small country, like very competitive world, gotta
Mm,
survive. And it's just like always so funny to me when people are shocked by that.
mm,
And I guess that was a little bit of my like fish out of water moment when I was like having conversations around this book around the world. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that is funny. I mean, it was stressful just reading about the pressure they were under and how much studying there was. I mean, I was a good student, but that was in the US, so the demands were were a fraction of that. So,
It was it's actually really funny because when I was in junior college, which is when you're 17, 18, A levels, you do A
mhm.
levels, right? Yeah.
In the
So at
UK,
that
I'm
point
familiar with
in
it.
the
Yeah.
UK,
Hmm.
yeah. So um it was seen as like, oh, if you're too stressed out, you go to the US. It's easy there. Like I actually, no, I'm serious. I'm actually serious. I had friends who like, I mean, it was not an option for me because we had no money. But if you were from a family that could afford to, many people are like, Singapore's too stressful. You know where we'll go? The US. And so I
Hmm.
had friends who were just like, my classmates who were like, I didn't do well for school. This is not a life I want to live. And then they drop out of like junior college, go to America, and they're the top of their class. And then
Yeah, I was
so
gonna
the
say
you
then, yeah, they probably
yeah,
have their pick of Ivy League universities because the
absolutely.
performance is so much better than your average American. Yeah.
And it is seen as kind of like Singaporeans are seen as globally competitive for this
Mm,
reason. But this is not like a coincidence. It was like very deliberately manufactured. Everything about the way our country like lays out its policies or like its practices does make us economically, pragmatically, and globally competitive. And that is a big plot
mm,
point, right, in the book, where
mm, hmm.
even the option for Genevieve to leave to get a work visa, this would not be possible, or it would be way harder if she was from a different country other than
Mm,
Singapore. Singapore has deliberately like geared the country to be competitive in that way. Our passport's
mm,
extremely powerful. Our primary language of administration is English. Like everybody
mm,
speaks English, and another language. But like no matter where in the world you immigrated from, like decades ago, you will be speaking English and not your mother tongue.
mm,
That makes us very, very like attractive to like the international companies. Like all
mm,
the big companies have their hubs in Asia, in Singapore. Google's hub is in Singapore. Airbnb, when you open their Asia hub
mm,
was Singapore. Everything about that becomes like almost like a little bit circular. So you're working so hard, and the idea is you're working so hard, but you know it's worth it because we're so competitive, because
mm,
we stand like way more of a chance of like than anybody else in a global stage. So it almost justifies itself. But at 15 years old, you don't care. You just want to like die. When you're studying, you're like, man,
mm,
this
yeah.
is like at some point there's gonna be a cherry that we can like pluck. But
Mm,
for the characters, I really wanted to encompass a sense that some people work and work and work, and a cherry never comes. It's interesting to me because I actually don't, and like I don't know if other people agree. I don't feel like this is unique to Singapore when we leave the school system. I feel like most people I know are like really struggling in a hyper capitalist society to stay alive, right? Like, so I currently am in New York. I split my time between New York and Singapore, and a lot of people I know here are like working so hard. Like the hustle cultures are insane, and everyone's like, I can't like live comfortably unless I make this amount of money. I can't do this unless I do that, and I'm just like, everyone is so stressed out. And to me, I'm very accustomed to stress because I'm Singaporean. So I'm like,
mm,
oh, stress is very comfortable for me. But I see it everywhere. And it just seems like it starts earlier for me than
mm,
for people in Singapore because we grew up with this like level of atmospheric pressure.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And probably you don't, like you said, you don't really feel it as much as anyone who grew up in the US and didn't grow up with that, but now are living in New York and feel more pressure. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. Are you stressed out generally? Like,
Well, no, I'm not, but I live in the UK now, so I feel
oh,
like
nice.
life is a lot easier actually in a lot of ways. Um, but yeah, I guess it has a lot to do with like the life you set up for yourself too, I guess. Outside
Mhm.
of, the constraints you explained in Singapore, at least in the US, obviously it depends a lot on how much money your family has for a million reasons. I mean, in my case, I feel a lot freer because I work freelance now, and I feel like
Mm.
that's the biggest change besides living in the UK. Yeah.
Yeah, I can totally see that. Yeah. And
Yeah.
I do think that, I mean, just picking on what you said earlier about depends on how much money your family has, I do think that money, it's like its own citizenship, right? It does
Mm-hmm.
change like the way you experience the country or like its pressures. So I have a character in my novel, Penelope, who she's like a friend of Genevieve's in school. Like her life experience is like drastically different because
Mm-hmm.
she has got money.
Mm-hmm.
And she has to work out her own relationship to having that money because she's aware that not everyone has the same amount of money.
Yeah.
So she's like a character who's interesting to me. She doesn't have that much airtime. Just because, like I guess I had wrote a lot more about her, but I had to cut a lot of it to like kind of fit into this book. But I am interested in the way she develops as well, like somebody who like is not comfortable with the wealth that she's born into and is
Yeah.
always trying to compensate for it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um and eventually learns like to have like a different kind of relationship with money. Yeah, that becomes its own block in the relationship, right? When
Mm-hmm.
it's like earlier I was saying, like a secret or like something that you treat with respect within a relationship or civility within a relationship can be its own distance. Money can also
Mm-hmm.
be its own distance if you're so hyper aware of it all the time. And she is extremely aware of like her kind of like her privilege because of her relationship to Genevieve, and that becomes like its own kind of like third person in the friendship that they have.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you so much. That was great. I got so much more out of the novel just through talking through those things with you.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I love talking about the novel. It's way more fun talking about it than it is trying to write it.
Bad Mothers is written, produced, and edited by me, Monica Cardenas. I'd love it if you'd rate and review the show and get in touch with any feedback. You can find me on my Substack, and guess what? It's called Bad Mothers too.